I want to begin today talking about this remarkable piece that was published over the weekend in the New York Times. And it shows your power. It shows the power of everybody in this audience. Every single one of you that chased ballots and registered voters, every single one of you that worked in the grassroots, that started Turning Point USA hubs and became a grassroots activist. It shows what you went up against. And the losers of this last election just recently convened at the Salamander Hotel in Washington, D.C. When the Democrats would say that our democracy is under attack, what they were really saying is that our oligarchy is under attack. That the rule of the few, that those of us in the council of experts that know better than you, and this is very similar to the situation that we articulated yesterday of why Kash Patel matters so much. That the Kash Patel appointment is trying to restore the founder's vision for law enforcement and for the administration of justice. That it will not be its own out of regulation, distant branch of government and bring it back into alignment with the consent of the governed. There is a remarkable piece in the New York Times that says this: what's a Democratic billionaire to do now? The party's donor class is still wrestling with Donald Trump's victory, worried about retribution and sluggish liberal energy. Some rich Democrats are even pondering leaving the country. This is by Theodore Schleifer, who is a very, very talented reporter for the New York Times. Let me begin by first isolating one of the subheads here. Some rich Democrats are even pondering leaving the country. Now, I'm sure there is an exception to what I'm about to say, but I do not know a single rich Republican that after Joe Biden became president in 2020 was contemplating leaving America. Some people would joke about it. Some people would say, oh, I'm going to leave. But it seems as if the Democrats look at their relationship with America far more transactionally than Republicans do. Democrats look at this as a temporary colony to make a bunch of money, to exert a fair amount of power. They do not have a loyalty or a fidelity to this country the same way that those as conservatives would do. The piece begins by saying this: in the weeks after Election Day, one of the biggest donors in the Democrat Party, the LinkedIn co-founder Reid Hoffman, has considered what would once be unthinkable for a billionaire who often talks about his patriotism, leaving the United States. Well, maybe his patriotism was all a facade. Mr. Hoffman, who has spent hundreds of millions of dollars on politics over the last few years, has told friends and allies that he's weighing a move overseas, according to 3 people with knowledge of the talks who insisted on anonymity to discuss private conversations. Hoffman declined to comment through a spokesperson and has helped pay for some of those aggressive private litigation against Donald Trump. The piece continues. Several major donors or their advisors have privately floated the idea of moving abroad, saying that it would protect their assets from Mr. Trump's wrath. Some are distributing memos meant to guide the post-mortem analysis for Democrats, beginning to kick around the ideas for new media companies or imploring their peers to not let liberal fundraising dry up. Now, this is a perfect segue, by the way, to another New York Times article that I want to draw your attention to before I continue on this one. So Democrats are meeting at the Salamander Hotel, and this is what it says here. The Salamander Hotel in Washington, where the typically sedate biannual meeting of the Democracy Alliance, a network of major liberal donors, became a 4-day group therapy session. Dejected Democrats debated about what happened at early morning breakfast and evening drinks around a fire pit on the sidelines of the conference, the first gathering of its type since the election. The lobby was buzzing with Democrat donors, operatives, and interlopers caught up with friends. Now, let me just kind of put a pause on that article and then highlight another New York Times article that came out this weekend. And it was about Turning Point USA and Turning Point Action. So you have a bunch of donors wondering, how did we lose? How did we lose? How did we lose? We need to start new media companies. We need to start our own podcasting. Well, let me draw your attention to this other article that is very, very important. And all of you in this audience that support Turning Point USA, all of you in this audience that support Turning Point Action, all of you in this audience that support the Charlie Kirk Show, you're the reason why Democrats are crying into their white wine at the Salamander Hotel. Republicans built an ecosystem of influencers. Some Democrats want one too. Democrats were badly outflanked online in the election, and progressive influencers are now trying to create networks to be a left-wing answer to Turning Point USA. The article goes into great detail about how the left and how Democrat operatives have been unable to build an influencer network like we have on the right. Now, mind you, I wish I could take full credit for this. And to be fair, Turning Point has operated a multi-100-person influencer network for the last 5 years. We have sourced amazing talent. We have trained amazing talent. We have this grassroots organization that harmonizes with the influencer program. The New York Times article writes, while many on the left have spent the last few weeks debating whether Ms. Harris should have granted an interview on the right-leaning host of the world's most popular podcast, some progressive influencers are now more interested in building up a Rogan of their own. Their goal is to eventually forge self-sustaining advocacy groups and networks, a left-wing answer to the nonprofit Turning Point USA. But first, they'll need buy-in and cash from Democrat donors and institutions to compete in a new attention economy where people's time is the currency. Now, remember, they had Joe Rogan. Joe Rogan endorsed Bernie Sanders. Joe Rogan was a man of the liberal left. They alienated Rogan, and Rogan proudly joined our movement. How they treated him during COVID, how they treated him because he took ivermectin, how they tried to smear and censor and slander him, how the full force of the regime came after Rogan and all of his followers. Now, let me remind you of something very, very important, that we complain a lot about how they control the media. It turns out then, going back to the other piece, these Democrats these Democrat donors at a conference and a retreat are wondering, how is it that Turning Point and this army that we were told didn't exist beat us? The piece continues, two attendees, two Democrat donors, said unprompted that the scene of Democrat donors in D.C. felt like a funeral. You helped make that funeral happen. And what they were eulogizing is the death of the modern Democrat Party. People are kind of shell-shocked, trying to remember what has happened. Steve Silberstein, a software entrepreneur who has donated millions to Democrats over the last decade, said in an interview, quote, people are trying to adjust to reality and plot out a path forward. Carla Jurvetson, a major progressive donor, was there alongside of, guess who? Alexander Soros. Everybody, you beat the wealthiest, most powerful people on the planet. Our grassroots hustle, our bottom-up energy, the infrastructure that we all built together. Mr. Soros says, he's quoted in the piece, quote, I was always concerned about Mr. Trump's victory. He said, however, we're not going to give up. We're going to keep our commitment to progressive causes. There are so many takeaways here, everybody, but one of the major ones is going into Election Day, Democrats were convinced they were going to win. They thought they were going to win. We didn't know the same. We said we could win, we could lose. We were always in the middle. But the American people rose up in numbers that they could never possibly comprehend. This was a revolt against the elites. This was the closest to the reclamation of the republic we've ever seen. And now Democrats are confused. They are haywire, trying to decide their direction forward. And Alexander Soros, the heir to the Soros fortune, is leading the funeral procession.